When the world number 2 beats a 2-0-year-old rising star 6-4, 6-2 inches Rome, the coverage usually calls it a valuable learning experience. But Elena Rybakina did not just beat Alex Eala. She exposed a dangerous gap that Eala's massive fanbase has been trying desperately to ignore. I have watched tennis for a long time, and the way the tennis world handles young phenoms is almost always the same. We rush them. We want the finished product yesterday. But this whole situation with Alexandra Eala, man, it's been eating at me. Because nobody is talking about the actual mechanics of what just happened in Italy. Everyone is looking at the scoreboard, patting her on the back, and saying she'll get them next time. Stay with me, because that is a very dangerous way to look at a career. Now, let us rewind the tape and look at the context. Because context is the only way to understand the weight of this moment. Alexandra Eala currently ranks inside the top 50 inches the world. Her trajectory since the start of the year, particularly stemming from her breakthrough runs starting in Auckland, has been nothing short of meteoric. She earned her spot, but with that rapid ranking climb comes a specific type of noise. If you look at her matches on the secondary courts in Abu Dhabi earlier this year, or the outer courts in Melbourne, you see something that does not match a standard top 5-0 profile. You see queues wrapping around the stadium. You see seas of flags. You hear the chants. The atmosphere is electric, heavy with the expectation of a nation and a global diaspora that treats her not just as a rising prospect, but as an established superstar. That level of support is beautiful. It is genuine. But it also creates an illusion. The illusion that because she is treated like a top-tier contender by the crowd, her game is already fully formed across all surfaces. Which brings us to the clay. On a Thursday afternoon at the Foro Italico, the illusion collided with reality, the round of 32 at the Italian Open. Elena Rybakina standing across the net, the scoreboard eventually read 6-4, 6-2 inches favor of the world number 2. Now, at first glance, that might seem like a standard, acceptable result. A young player runs into a Grand Slam champion on a hot streak and takes a respectable loss. But the general coverage missed entirely what actually took place between the lines. Rybakina did not just overpower Eala, she systematically dismantled the illusion. This is where we have to separate the hype from the tactical reality. Rybakina's flat, heavy ball striking on the slow red dirt requires perfect footwork to counter. It requires an instinctual understanding of how to slide, how to recover, and how to construct points when your primary weapons are neutralized by the surface. During that 1 hour and 20-minute match, the gap in clay court hours became painfully visible. Eala was fighting the surface just as much as she was fighting Rybakina. Every time Eala hit a decent passing shot in Rome, the crowd erupted as if it were championship point. That wall of sound can make a player feel invincible. But tennis, especially on clay, is an incredibly isolating sport. When the ball comes back twice as heavy, and your footing slips by a fraction of an inch, all the cheers in the world cannot fix a mechanical deficit. Rybakina played with a chilling detachment. She ignored the crowd. She ignored the narrative. She simply executed. And in doing so, she exposed the raw, unfinished edges of a 2-0-year-old's game. The generous reading of this match is that Rybakina is simply playing at an untouchable level right now. That is the comforting narrative for the fans. But the less generous reading, the one that the coaching team must look at in the cold light of day, is that Eala's massive popularity is moving much faster than her developmental timeline on dirt. This is not a criticism of Eala's talent. This is a spotlight on a fundamental mismatch. The popular understanding is that Rybakina was simply too strong on the day. But there is a deeper, more uncomfortable story buried under the red dirt of the Foro Italico, and it is a story that Alex Eala herself is finally being forced to confront. Now, to understand how deeply this illusion runs, you have to look at the mechanics of Elena Rybakina. Rybakina does not play the occasion. She does not play the crowd, and she certainly does not play the narrative. When she steps onto the dirt, she brings a flat, penetrating ball that strips away everything except pure technical competence. She does not care that you are the next big thing. She only cares about whether your footwork can handle a 120 mile/hour flat serve out wide on a slippery surface. And in Rome, the answer was no. On a hard court, like the ones in Auckland or Melbourne where she built her top 5-0 ranking, Eala can rely on a true bounce. She can plant her feet and trust her baseline timing. But the clay is alive. It demands patience, micro-adjustments, and a completely different physiological response. Rybakina exposed the fact that Eala does not yet have that response. The match itself was the physical exposure. But the psychological exposure came a few days later. On Wednesday, May 13, 2026, an official piece was published on the Roland Garros website. It featured an in-depth conversation with Eala as she prepares for the Parisian dirt. The timing is crucial here. The dust from the Rome defeat had just settled. The hype train was desperately trying to get back on track for the French Open, and in the middle of that anticipation, Eala delivered a quote that stopped the entire narrative dead in its tracks. Speaking to the official Roland Garros outlet, Eala said this: "I know a lot of people have come up and said to me like, oh, you're going to be tough on clay. But obviously I haven't spent that much time on clay. For months, the tennis world has been operating under an assumed premise. Because Eala trains at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca, because she is surrounded by the ultimate Spanish clay court royalty, the public and the media naturally assumed that the red dirt was in her blood. They saw the Academy logo on her gear and automatically projected a high-level clay court pedigree onto her. The fanbase bought into the idea that she would arrive in Europe and immediately start grinding down opponents. But here is the thing about tennis. You cannot inherit clay court instincts through proximity. You cannot absorb the ability to construct points on dirt just by breathing the same air as Rafael Nadal. It requires hundreds, if not thousands, of agonizing hours specifically drilling movement, kick serves, and heavy topspin loops. Eala is fundamentally, at this stage of her young career, a player who thrives on faster surfaces where her timing and clean ball striking do the maximum damage. By her own admission, she simply has not logged the hours on clay to warrant the massive expectations being placed upon her shoulders. Rybakina did not just win a tennis match. She forced the 2-0-year-old star to publicly acknowledge the illusion. When Eala says, "Obviously, I haven't spent that much time on clay," the word doing the real work is obviously. To her, it is a glaring technical reality. She knows her own practice logs. She knows her own comfort level when trying to reverse direction on a sliding surface. But to the thousands of fans expecting her to bulldoze through the draw, it was not obvious at all. They were projecting a finished product onto a player who is still very much in the early development phase of her clay court game. The gap between what Eala actually is and what the crowd desperately wants her to be had been blown wide open. Now, this brings us to the psychological weight of what happened in Italy. Because the physical exposure on the court is only half of the story. The other half, the more dangerous half, is happening entirely in Eala's head, and it is being fueled by the very people chanting her name. In that same Roland Garros interview published on May 13th, there is a second piece of the puzzle. It is a quote that, when placed next to her admission about lacking clay court experience, creates a terrifying statistical reality. Speaking directly to the official outlet about the massive crowds queuing to see her play, Eala admitted, "I saw a couple of clips of the lines and the people, and I was really surprised. I was a little in denial. It's hard to accept. I don't think I'm really famous. I don't think I'm really famous." That is a 2-0-year-old athlete experiencing a severe disconnect between her internal identity and the external noise. Here is where the true exposure lies. Elena Rybakina stripped away the tactical illusion in Rome, but Eala herself is stripping away the psychological one in Paris. If you actually map the data, you arrive at a staggering pattern. On one side of the ledger, you have tens of thousands of fans from the Philippines and across the globe, packing stadiums from the United Arab Emirates to Italy, treating her arrival as the coronation of an established global superstar. On the other side of the ledger, you have a player who is openly admitting she has not spent enough time on clay, and who is genuinely shocked that people are standing in line to watch her. The sheer volume of people physically queuing for tickets to see her play currently outnumbers the total hours she has actually spent competing against top-tier opponents on professional red clay. The crowd is, inadvertently, cheering for a phantom. They are cheering for a version of Alexandra Eala that does not exist yet. The gap between those two realities is the most dangerous space in professional tennis. When you are a rising talent trying to find your footing on a demanding surface like the red dirt of France or Italy, you need the space to fail quietly. You need the freedom to lose a match, adjust your sliding mechanics, and go back to the practice courts, without it becoming a national sports headline in the Philippines or a viral topic on social media. But Eala does not have that luxury. The exposure is constant. Every time she steps onto the dirt, she is carrying the weight of an identity that she does not even fully accept. She is being forced to inhabit the role of a top-tier contender while simultaneously trying to learn the basic survival mechanics of clay court tennis. This is not an environment conducive to patient development. This is a pressure cooker. That is the real gap Rybakina exposed. It is not just about a flat forehand or a kick serve. It is about a young player whose public profile has massively outpaced her specific surface experience. The fan base, in all its genuine and beautiful support, is demanding a finished product. But Eala, in her own quiet and honest way, is telling the world that the product is still very much under construction. You start to wonder how long a player can sustain that contradiction before the pressure simply becomes too much. The clay season does not care about your potential, and it certainly does not care about how many people are waiting in line to see you play. It only respects the hours you have suffered on the dirt. When you talk about suffering on the red dirt, all roads eventually lead back to one man. And this is particularly relevant for Eala, given the fact that she trains at his very academy in Mallorca. Rafael Nadal did not win 14 French Open titles by hitting the ball cleaner than everyone else. He won them by mastering a very specific psychological state. Nadal has explicitly stated the foundational philosophy of his career, an ethos that is supposedly baked into the walls of his academy. In order to reach success, one must learn to suffer, not just accept it, but also embrace it. Rybakina exposed the fact that Eala has not yet learned how to suffer on this surface. Her fans want to carry her over the finish line, but the dirt demands that you drag yourself across it. Now, I want to be honest about the limits of this argument. I am not saying Alexandra Eala cannot play on clay, or that her team is completely oblivious. There is a completely valid version of this story, where both the hype and the reality check serve a purpose. The generous reading is that the straight sets loss to Rybakina was exactly the wake-up call Eala needed. It shattered the illusion early enough. It gave her the ultimate reality check before stepping onto the grounds of Roland Garros, stripping away the noise of the crowd and replacing it with a stark list of technical priorities. The less generous reading is that the European clay swing is simply too short for a 20-year-old to suddenly learn how to suffer properly. You cannot cram for a clay court exam. But if you look closely at the data specifically, her immediate schedule, you can see that her coaching team is fully aware of this reality. They are not waiting for a miracle in Paris. Following the exposure in Rome, Eala made the decision to enter the qualifying draw for the WTA 500 event in Strasbourg. Think about that for a second. A player with her surging profile, someone who commands stadium courts in the Middle East and Asia, is willingly dropping into the grueling, unglamorous trenches of a qualifying draw just days before a Grand Slam. Why? Because they desperately need the hours. Playing the qualifiers in Strasbourg is not about chasing ranking points or building a brand. It is a calculated, urgent attempt to buy more time on the red clay. It is her team acknowledging the exact gap that Rybakina exposed. They are deliberately stepping away from the massive crowds and the main draw hype to put her in a position where she has to grind. They are consciously opting into the suffering. They know that the illusion the fans have created will not survive the first round of the French Open. The only thing that will survive is reality. So, what happens when she finally arrives in Paris? My prediction is this. Roland Garros this year is not going to be a fairy tale run for Alexandra Eala. The main draw of a Grand Slam on clay does not care about your massive online following, and it certainly does not care about the length of the queue outside your practice court. It is going to be the most brutal classroom she has ever stepped into. If the illusion of her clay court readiness was shattered in Rome, Paris is where we find out exactly what is left underneath. It is going to be uncomfortable to watch at times. She is going to slide late. She is going to get pushed deep behind the baseline by heavy topspin. But if she can absorb that stark reality, if she can take the harsh exposure that Rybakina handed her and use it as a literal blueprint for how to suffer on the dirt, then this short clay season will be a massive long-term success, completely regardless of her actual win-loss record. The question that sits underneath all of this is not whether she can win the French Open right now. The question is whether she can survive the environment without letting the crushing weight of those external expectations completely derail her natural development. Tell me in the comments what you actually think. Did Elena Rybakina's straight sets win expose a fatal flaw in Eala's game, Or was it the exact reality check she needed to survive the French Open? Come back to this video when the first round kicks off in Paris, because everything we have discussed today will either look prescient or look like overcautious noise. If this kind of analysis is what you come here for, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. The most interesting takes always end up at the top, so get in there. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.